And again, you are here on a recorded webinar and workshop. We will share the link later, like mentioned, and we will discuss how to build your own internal developer platform with your own tools based on Humanitec products, right? And we call that also how you could build your most viable platform in 2 hours. So the content will help you to understand the concept, what could be an IDP, an internal developer platform in general, and with Humanitec, how you could bring your own reference architecture, your own tool, your own infrastructure. I will do a quick demo for everyone before starting to the actual workshop. And we will wrap up providing some links, resources, but please don't wait for the end to ask your question. Yes, we will have dedicated time for that. But again, could you please drop in the Q&A section or in the chat? Q&A section will be better to moderate and answer the question as they come. But yeah, please, as I'm delivering the content, please interrupt, ask the question, and I will try my best to answer them. Otherwise, we will do that offline as well. So again, I'm Mathieu Benoit. I'm Customer Success Engineer at Humanitec, and I'm really excited to deliver this workshop to you. I'm customer facing, and I'm doing hands-on activities with my customer in order to deliver what you will see today. So again, that's my pleasure to spend the time here with you. Thank you for your time. And the agenda was already covered. What we want you to understand at the end of this session is what could be a workload specification in order to simplify the experience and the life of the developers interacting with your own IDP built on top of, again, your own existing tools and Humanitec Orchestrator, right? So you will see the differences, the key concept, and how you could leverage and integrate this tool in your own ecosystem. At the end, we will have some pointer as well, or how to start small and start and iterate to gain experience with your own IDP, your own internal developer platform. So just to have some context and making sure everyone is on the same page here, we have seen platform engineering as an evolution of DevOps, most recently, right? 2009 maybe, where it was an answer to the sysadmin world back in the day, where we got a lot of silos. If I was a developer, I was dropping my package to deploy an application, database, or whatever, and the sysadmin was responsible to deploy this thing. But it was a silos mechanism, process in place, where we were not talking to each other very seamlessly, very transparently on a collaborative way. So that's why DevOps came, right? And saying, hey, let's break the wall and making sure we have more collaboration. But we saw like a deviance, like something very bad happening for the developer, because it was this, you build it, you run it philosophy, if I could say, and it was too much overload on the developer. Because as a developer, if I'm a Python, Java developer, .NET developer, should I do Kubernetes? Should I do Terraform? Should I do GCP, AWS, Azure, and all the security observability stuff? Maybe not, right? I have experts in my company, very dedicated, experienced in that area. So how we could collaborate more together. And platform engineering is all about that. How we take the best of the sysadmin world, the DevOps world, and now making more a seamless collaboration, right? And there is a lot of stakeholders involved in this platform engineering revolution, right? And each of these stakeholders have different objectives. As a developer, I want to self-serve. I don't want to take too much time on the technical detail. I don't want to learn maybe AWS. Maybe that's good on my resume, right? But at the end of the day, if I do infrastructure security stuff, it's important, but I'm not focused on delivering value for my business. So as a developer, I want to have more velocity. I want a speed way to deliver value to my customer, right? On the CIO perspective, I want to be quicker in the time to market. I want to deliver product and feature for the business and for my end user in order to make money, right? To get incomes for the company, to pay people, etc., etc. And there is architects as another key stakeholder where we want standardization, how we could automate, right? How we could standardize the different things across the board for the different teams, project, line of business, developers. On a finance perspective, maybe there is, hey, we want to save more cost, right? Cloud cost, infrastructure cost, why not? And other area to optimize. And on an operation perspective, how we drive automation, like mentioned with standardization earlier. On the security, how we are compliant and secure by design, by default, without waiting for the developer to implement something, how we could inject transparently such capabilities, and very important governance and security capabilities. So if we summarize, on a developer standpoint, I want to deploy my app and just focused on that without dealing with Kubernetes and infrastructure. On the other side, platform engineering, and we could aggregate with all the technical stakeholder, the other technical stakeholder, cloud ops, observability, security, etc. What they want is abstracting a consistent and secure platform to make this developer very more autonomous, right? So that's the platform engineering in a nutshell. And we are looking, and you may be looking for more velocity for the developer, that's for sure, and stability for the platform with the platform engineering teams. And what you need to focus on, because here it's not technical at all, it's now when you build your IDP, internal developer platform, you have now this, what we call the product mindset, right? You have a roadmap, you have customer, the developer or your customer. So how you develop this product mindset, like you will do with a project for end user, right? You will do the same with the IDP, which is very important. You will have a roadmap, you will have a PO, product owner or product manager, etc., right? So very important concept here. There is 3 key pillars for a successful adoption of your IDP. There is the abstraction, there is a standardization, and the visualization, because for doing self-service, I should be abstracted from standard, and I should be able to visualize in order to have some first debugging tool and information status about deployment and my service catalog, right? We have 3 main tools that we will go through today during this workshop: SCORE, Humanitec SCORE, and SCORE actually, the orchestrator, Humanitec Orchestrator, and Humanitec Portal, right? So we will see which role each of them have, and we will see in action how to leverage one and the other. For SCORE, it's a CNCF Sandbox project now, so it's open source. It's based, and it's now part of the CNCF landscape, Cloud Native Computing Foundation, based on the Linux Foundation, which is very exciting to see the community driving and contributing to the evolution of this SCORE specification and implementation. The SCORE file is, we will see that in action, but that's a typical SCORE file. It's a contract. It's an abstracted way to define how I want to deploy a workload and which dependencies I need. Do I need to expose this workload? Do I need a Redis database? Do I need a MySQL database? What's the password? What's the key? What's the connectivity between my workload and this database? Is it in AWS? Is it in Azure and GCP? I don't know as a developer. I have a contract that I'm passing along to my IDP, my platform, right? And the orchestrator, the platform, will deal with all the technical detail implementation. That's what SCORE is putting and bringing on the table, abstracting for the developer in order for them to just focus on their code and having this contract, right? Defining the contract. So that's for SCORE and having this self-service mechanism. I want a Redis. Next, there is the recipes. All the stakeholders I mentioned, platform engineering, cloud engineer, observability, security, they will be able to put in the orchestrator that we will see in a few seconds, recipes. Here is how to deploy a DNS, to provision a DNS. Here is how to provision a Redis database in this very example in front of you, right? So you will be able, as platform engineer teams, you will be able to bring your own recipes from your own organization, how to do a Redis, how to do a DNS, etc., how to inject security, etc., observability, right? You will be able to define that, again, for standardization while doing abstraction. Very important here. And you will be able to define that by type and where, how, and also for who. For this project one, line of business, environment dev, staging, prod, you could have different behavior, right? So we will see all of that. If we put all of them together, there is the orchestrator. Very key pieces. You have, at the very bottom, the platform engineering defining all the golden path we want to support for our own IDP, right? We want to support DNS, Redis, MySQL, but maybe we don't want to support yet MongoDB. So you will define the list of what we call resource definition, kind of a recipes. And next, the developer will be able to ask and self-serve. I want an S3 bucket. I want a Postgres. Please, orchestrator, resolve that for me, right? And at the end of the day, we will generate what we call the resource graph, because you are asking for graph dependencies, resource graph dependencies here. The orchestrator will resolve all of that based on the recipe and resource definition designed by the platform engineer. I could add a Redis. What it will do, it will go to the orchestrator. We will select a specific resource definition based on the context. Are you deploying from project 1 or 2? Are you deploying in dev, staging, and prod? Oh, okay, you are in staging for Redis in this project. Let's provision this Redis database, or let's assign this Redis database already existing, right? And that's how the powerful mechanism in place for the orchestrator is doing the magic of selecting all of that. Last piece, it's the UI, the portal, right? Internal developer portal and not platform. It's how I visualize everything, how I have some observability, or how I see my service catalog, my project, my container, my workload running. And here we have an example where we could see this graph resolved live from within the Humanitec portal. So that's the third tool with Humanitec that you could use. It's coming with by default with the orchestrator. What we will see today as well is how we could play and use both the Humanitec portal and Backstage. Backstage is yet another developer portal that you may be familiar with. So today we will play with that and see the combination of both. And maybe you want to use just one or the other or both of them. So today you will be able to see in action where they complement each other and maybe some overlap. But we will see that there is different goals and investment maybe in building your Backstage implementation. So far, so good. Is there any question? Please drop the question as they come in the chat, in the Q&A section. It's better. I will try to do my best to answer the question. What I want now to, no question. Thank you. Cool. What I want you to realize is with the three products, where do they fit in my current ecosystem of tools? Because supposedly, when you are looking for platform engineering, you are not starting from scratch. You have your own cloud infrastructure already in place. You may have already some compute on Kubernetes or others, and you have some friction. You have some pain point. You want to resolve some pain point for your developer. We mentioned objective of the different stakeholders in the company. delivering faster, adding more QA, more quality test, name it, right? You have your own pain point. You have your own stuff you want to optimize. So the goal here with today, I hope, is understanding where we fit. And are we replacing stuff, or are we just integrating and improving your own existing tools? And the answer is the latter, right? We will see that how less disturbing it is to use our tools. At the end of the day, you have the developer plane. They have their local environment. They have their IDE, Eclipse, VS Code, IntelliJ, whatever, you name it. And they have a source control, GitHub, GitLab, right? That's the developer control plane. That's most of their day-to-day job, right? Here, what you will add here is Score next to their application and their Docker file maybe, and adding a portal, because you may want to have a unified single pane of glass for having the developer portal here centralized. So here we have two products already illustrated, Score and the portal. You may have Backstage and other tools, but that's how people, developer, will self-serve, will have a day-to operation, monitoring and information. But that's pretty much it, right? After that, what you have, as soon as a developer commit in Git or source control, there is a CI/CD pipeline. You have already that. We don't do anything. What we do is we integrate with your CD tool, continuous deployment or continuous delivery tool, right? And you will interact with our API, with the orchestrator, in order to resolve the contract of the Score file. So here in your CD pipeline, if today you do kubectl apply or Helm upgrade or Terraform apply, you don't do that anymore with the orchestrator, and we will see how. You will just ping our orchestrator with a contract, and we will do the Kubernetes apply and the Terraform apply, right? So that's what you need to know. We are simplifying this abstraction here. And then there is a resource plane. Here I'm using GCP as a reference architecture, but it's working with AWS. Pick and choose and replace with your own tools here, right? GitLab, Azure DevOps, Jenkins, GitHub Action, Azure, replace everything. That's the principle to say where we fit in your own reference architecture. And yes, important tool across the board is monitoring its security, right? So that's the reference architecture here. Very important to understand what we do already here and what we don't do, because we don't replace your CI/CD. We don't replace your Kubernetes cluster. We don't replace your container registry. You bring all of that, right? We have some reference architecture, like I mentioned, for OpenShift, AWS, Azure, and GCP. We will provide the link at the end of this recording and this presentation. And we have also what we call the resource pack in order to implement. When someone is asking for a Redis, is it Redis in cluster or in Terraform in AWS? You could have some example, right? And we will see that kind of in action today. But that's some pointer to have. What I want to clarify as well is there is three main parts, because like you just saw earlier, we are part of your CD pipeline. That's it. And we interact with your resource plane and your security plane, etc., etc. But in this CD, we are doing, in the orchestrator, we are doing three main parts to deploy workloads and infrastructure, both of them, right? I will pause a little bit. There is a question. Is the Score file always the same format? Yeah, we got a question from Victor. Thank you for asking. Yes, so the Score file, and I will show you live. It was one slide, but I will show you live. Yes, the Score is a Score project is actually first a Score specification, a workload specification. So it's fixed. There is a specification. It's for containerized workload, right? And it's CNCF, so it's open source. People could contribute if we want to have some involvement in this specification. But then there is the implementation, how to transcribe this specification to a concrete platform. So this spec, as a developer, I feel the values, but I'm platform agnostic and I'm environment agnostic. So to your point, kind of always the same format, right? And then the implementation, we have Score Compose, Score Kubernetes, Humanitec, and we are expecting people implementing their own implementation based on this format in order to deploy in different platforms, right? So I hope I answered the question. Otherwise, I will illustrate better during the demo and the workshop about that. We have another question. You said the client is responsible for data security topics, right? When you say client, are you talking for customer, like the developers? If that's the case, at the end of the day, we are all in the company responsible for security, right? But you will see with platform engineering, right? You will need, and one of the goals for you is to abstract and what we call shift down to the platform all the security and observability mechanism, right? Because you don't want your developer at the end of the day doing security context, scanning of vulnerabilities. You want to automate that, right? Because you don't want them to learn what they need to do, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the concept of not shifting left to the developer, but shifting down to the platform as much as you can, right? Cool. Thank you, Alexander, for the question. And I just saw a message that it was clarifying a bit. Feel free to post another question on that if you need. Yes, and Humanitec will be able to translate what it's defined in Score. And you will be, as platform engineer, to say, hey, for Redis, someone asking for Redis in Score, by default, we don't do anything, but your organization will be able to put the resource definition I mentioned, and will be able to say, hey, for Redis, for this project, this environment, do this, provision that here, Redis 5, Redis 6, with TLS, with yada, yada, right? And you will do your own implementation of that, right? So that's what we are going to see. Thank you for the question. Please, let's have the other question coming. Let me take another one. I understood Score is for container workload specification. Is the complementary infrastructure spec something different? If so, it's also CNCF. Wow, good question. Thank you, Zishan. Actually, it's misleading when I said, and we are claiming workload specification. It's kind of misleading because your question is good, because actually it's for the workload part as well as the dependencies on the infrastructure perspective. I want a DNS, I want a Redis, that's infrastructure. That's the dependencies of the workload. So on the workload spec, there is a workload itself, containerized workload, specification, information, metadata, plus the dependencies. And here it will go in container and deployment in Kubernetes, let's say, and the infrastructure pieces. So it's both. So that's a good question. Thank you for asking. Do you have a marketplace or partnership program? Yes, we have a partnership program. So we have an email address, or Maria could drop an email address to you. But yeah, we are developing the partnership ecosystem for partner like system integrator and others. If it was a question, yeah, we have such a program in place. Let me continue, but thank you for the question. Three main parts to understand with the orchestrator. We take the score file, part one on the left in a blue. We are actually taking, and you will ping from your own CD tool, our orchestrator, API driven, and you will say, please deploy this score file in this context, right? That's the first part. Second part is actually building the resource graph with what we call the Humanitec pipeline, and we will generate what we call the Humanitec custom resource. The runtime we support today is Kubernetes, so it will be Kubernetes custom resource, right? And here we reserve the graph, the workload, the infrastructure, the secrets, and we generate the graph. And here you have two options. Either you give access directly to the cluster, even private cluster, in your own infrastructure, and we deploy that directly on your behalf, or we put that in a Git repository because maybe you are using Flux CD, Argo CD, config sync, a GitOps tool, in order to actually deploy this Kubernetes manifest, right? So that's 2 options on the part 2. And the last mile, in the cluster, when your Flux CD pulled the CR or we pushed the CR, Humanitec CR, part 3 on the right side in green, that will be the play of the operator. You will install an operator in your Kubernetes cluster. And here we will resolve the graph actually. And we will deploy the Kubernetes manifest, and we will deploy all the infrastructure dependencies as well, right? All of that operating in your own infrastructure for security perspective, right? Very important to understand here. I don't want to have too much technical detail, but I have often the question. So here it's at the first option I mentioned, 3 parts, again, blue, red, green. But that's the first option with a direct push of the Humanitec CR in your cluster via a private agent. So there is a private tunnel in order to access your private infrastructure, private API server for your Kubernetes cluster. And there is some mechanism to have your own Terraform runner, Humanitec Terraform runner, in order to run the Terraform plan if you want to deploy infrastructure and deploy the Kubernetes resources. That's a kind of flow for the option 1, direct access to your cluster, deployment to your cluster. The second option, GitOps. Same 3 parts, blue, red, and green, and you have the GitOps option. So we are not going through the private agent to reach your Kubernetes API. We are just pushing the CR in the GitOps and the Git repository. Your GitOps tool will pull, and the operator will do the same in the green part explained, right? So I don't want to confuse you, but that's often a question I have, and we have, what's the technical detail of the deployment and where my tool fits. If you have Argo CD, you replace the GitOps on the right by Argo CD, and that's it, right? That's how it's working, right? And on the left, CD pipeline, calling Humanitec deploy. If you have Jenkins, GitLab pipeline, GitHub action, that's your tool, calling our orchestrator or Humanitec deploy to trigger all of that, right? So I hope it clarifies a bit, but that's a very important concept. Often the question is recurring, so I made this slide to clarify this. So far, so good, I hope. If it's not clear, if you want more information, please interrupt in the chat, in the Q&A section. Let me do kind of a very quick demo, right? Here, what I want to show you is the developer persona. I'm a developer. In my day-to-day basis, I'm locally, right? And I'm debugging my application, Node, JS application, Python, Java, .NET, right? I may do Dockerfile, maybe, maybe not. Or someone is doing that. I may be using Buildpack in order to not having Dockerfile. Maybe I'm writing Dockerfile. Maybe someone is writing Dockerfile for me. But at the end of the day, that's the artifact I have, my app and the containerized specification package, right? Now, what you will have as a developer is a score file, right? That's just it, right? And that's where, so if I open this guy here, what I want to show you here is while restarting my code space in GitHub, here it's like I have my VS Code locally. I'm using VS Code via code space in GitHub. I don't know if you're familiar, it's a cloud environment. While it's loading, I'm opening one of my applications. Again, I'm a developer. So here my developer inner loop is to debug locally my service, microservice or different services, depending on how you set up that. But at the end of the day, I have my application, right? Here it's a Node.js application, right? Talking to a Postgres database. So I have my code in an index.js. I have my Docker file maybe, right? That's my artifact, right? My packages, etc., right? But what you will have now is actually a score file. A score file, again, it's a specification. I know which port I'm exposing for my container and my application actually where is listening. So I have the name. I will provide an image. But actually, I don't know the image at this stage because it's agnostic to the environment, to the platform. And someone, a CI/CD pipeline, will build the container for me. They will put a tag, a digest. I don't know. I don't know the name. I don't know the registry. Is it in AWS? Is it in GCP? Is it in Artifactory, JFrog? I don't know, right? So here, yes, I have an image, and it will package from the Docker file my application, right? And I have environment variable, right? I need a port to expose my application and to listen for my application. And here I have dependencies, a database, for example, in this case. And look at this section. That's how the workload specs say, yeah, I have all of this here, very specific to my workload, right? But here I will also define all the infrastructure dependencies, the direct dependencies I need. I'm not mentioning I need a cluster. That's implicit. I'm not mentioning I need a namespace in Kubernetes. That's implicit. Here, that's explicit stuff. No overload, right? I need to expose my application or not. Yes, I want a DNS. Is it internal? Is it external? Maybe I could provide more information. There is this concept of class, where here I could say it's an internal, not publicly, right? Or it could be external. And I want also a database, right? But here I'm not providing the value of the DNS. I'm not providing the value of the username, password, connection string, whatever for MySQL. Look at this. What I know is someone will inject that at runtime, before runtime, at deployment time, actually, right? You remember the orchestrator resolving with the 3 ports. Here, someone will inject the placeholder and replace the placeholder. They will know at deployment time the port, the host, the password, the username. Here, I'm using 5 environment variable. I could build a connection string. The goal is to inject that in my code, right? At runtime, someone will inject that here, right? So I'm following the 12-factor pattern for my application. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I could take this core file, deploy that anywhere. My platform engineer will decide where. Is it in AWS, GCP, Azure? Is it in dev, staging, and prod? That's the same contract, right? I don't change anything here. What will change is the actual value, the actual target, the actual recipes that the platform engineer will put together. I will take some questions here. Will this be recording? Yes, we will provide the link of this recording session. Do you provide advanced capabilities like looping and conditional checks in the score file YAML? That's a good question. Not directly in the YAML file, in the score file, but there is a way to do that more on the resource definition, so more on the platform, because again, you don't want a complexity here. And with core, the goal was to shift this kind of complexity on the right. Maybe you have use cases in mind, but the answer, the best answer I could provide as for now is no, not such complexity here, but something to do in the platform itself. Will this auto create the secret inside the secret manager? And how we will put the secret value? That's a good question, right? I will show you an example, actually. Let me show you. Actually, here, what you could do is you could say, hey, I have the need of environment variable with values or secret. Config map at the end of the day or secret, right? And here, what you will say is, I need to have access, and let's call this guy on. Here's the name I'm giving. And here, let's say I want my secret, right? And the goal here will be to say resources again, and here I will have someone, maybe me as a developer or with the help of platform engineer, I will have my secret, right? Here, I'm not putting the value because you don't want secrets in your Git repository. So there is a mechanism where the secret will be in Vault, Azure Key Vault, AWS secret, name it GCP, SM, secret manager, and external secret could be bring and linked to the platform in order to say, yeah, someone will resolve and try to find this secret here, right? From an external secret store, for example. So there is such mechanism. You are right. That's a good question. I'm just providing high-level information here. The setup is something to deep dive on, but it's not part of the workshop. But that's a good question. So I hope I provided enough information at this stage, right? Thank you for the question. Nice. Is it possible to validate the score spec before it is deployed? If the DNS is missing in this case, but the dev wants to expose the container port? That's a good question. Different area to test and validate that. What I want to show you, and actually that's part of my next demo, part of the demo. What I want to do here is actually, if I say here, test, test, do you think it's part of the score specification? Maybe not, right? Property test is not allowed. So I have a lint in my IDE here to help me to understand the score specification. I could have here what I could fill out, the field supported by the spec, and helping me designing my score file. If I have snippet technical documentation, I may have also some auto-completion linter here. But what I want to show you as well is, let's say, MongoDB. I want a MongoDB, right? Type MongoDB. Is it supported by my platform? In this case, no. My own platform today doesn't expose MongoDB. They are supporting MySQL and other, and here it's not supported. So here what I need to do is, hey, platform engineer, we need a Mongo, how I could self-serve. Could you implement something for me? And we sit down and we see what you need, what you are doing today, and what could be standardized for everyone in the organization or just for you to implement this MongoDB implementation, right? So here, to part of answering your question, there is a way to do that. And look at this. Actually, I have in my VS Code extension, we have a Humanitec VS Code extension to help you with that. Look at this. I have environment, I have service, I have Redis, DNS, root, TLS cert, Postgres, MySQL. I don't have Mongo. But here, for sure, I could use Redis, right? And it will work, right? So that's one aspect to do that. If I do MongoDB here, there is a command with the CLI of Humanitec, but there is also this command here to validate the score file. And I will see in my score file here that, yeah, the resource is not allowed, right? So you could integrate locally this validation. You could integrate this Humanitec validate in your CI/CD pipeline. That's the first part, right? But what I want to show you is actually another stuff you could do here. One of the implementation, because SCORE is a CNCF Sandbox project. It's not Humanitec, right? There is 2 open source SCORE implementation. The implementation of SCORE for Humanitec is our product, right? Our own implementation for the orchestrator. But there is also 2 open source implementation today, and we are getting more and more contribution here. The first one is I want to take this core file in Docker Compose. I want to run, not in Humanitec, this core file. I want to run this core file and this container associated to that locally in Docker Compose. Guess what? You could use what we call score compose. So I will, I'm using a makefile just to accelerate the demo. But look at this. I'm using here score compose to initialize locally my namespace, my workspace, sorry, of score compose. And then I'm saying, hey, please generate the Docker Compose file, because I don't know Docker Compose and I don't want to learn as a developer, maybe. Please generate, based on this core file, the Docker Compose file, and maybe injecting some values, environment variable, yada, yada. And at the end of the day, do Docker Compose up with a build, because you remember in the core file, there is a dot. So here we are grabbing the Docker file. We are building with Docker Compose, actually, the container, and we are deploying the container itself and the dependencies. So look at this. While I was talking, I just run this command here, compose test, right? Doing all what I just explained. Look at this. I have Docker images. The images was built. Docker PS. I have the node service application, the workload. I'm exposing with a DNS locally. The local implementation is an Nginx proxy, and I have a database, right? Because I ask for MySQL in my score file. So this guy, Score Compose implementation, is able to resolve the workload spec and the dependencies in this workload spec. And at the end of the day, I'm able to curl and ping my application, and guess what? Boom, it's running, testing. So I could move forward, right? There is the same principle with core Kubernetes. If I have a Kubernetes cluster locally, I could do the exact same. I will deploy, in, let's say, in a kind cluster, in this make file, you will have access to. You could play with score and make Kubernetes test. Same principle. We will deploy, generate the Kubernetes manifest for the MySQL in cluster and the workload and the Nginx, and deploy that in the kind cluster, and you could test it. We could do more tests like this before pushing that in Humanitec, for example, right? Very convenient for more robust tests. Here it's locally. If you want to provide that to your developers, that's an opportunity. But if it's too much cognitive load here, you could put that in your CI/CD pipeline directly. And your CI/CD pipeline could do what I just do locally, right? So that's to add more tests on that. I hope I answer with an illustration your question. Otherwise, feel free to add more scenario. Is all of this leading us to a setup that's typically difficult to run, deploy, and test on local? I hope I clarify, because the question was posed 3 minutes ago. Not sure I'm understanding the question, but what we have seen is the goal is to simplify all of that, right? Now, if it's too much cognitive load with Core Compose and stuff, you could put that in CI/CD and fail fast in order to give feedback. If you're not able to build your container before pushing in the registry, you will fail fast and provide an error to your developer, right? That's the same. If this container and this core specification is not running locally with Docker Compose, you will fail fast and provide an information, right? So you could simplify and abstract if you want, right? So again, I hope I answer your question on that, but that's how I will answer that. For DNS, does this also provide for integration orchestration with API gateway? That's a good question. By default, you say, I want a DNS here, right? And a route. And I will show you the technical detail implementation in Humanitec. I could spend some time, but I don't want to spend some time. But look at that for Docker Score Compose. When I did Score Compose init, you remember here? It was going too fast maybe, but I did Score Compose init. What this guy was doing is creating a subfolder .score compose, where we provide the CNCF project, open source, the default provisioners. And guess what? It's not magical to implement MySQL in cluster or a DNS in one way or the other, right? But look at that. We have how to answer dependencies on volume, on Redis, on Postgres, on S3 bucket with min.io, for example, RabbitMQ, right? That's the default provisioner we have. You could bring your own provisioner, and you could override this default provisioner. And for the DNS, we have the information here, and we have the root. And the root here is actually building an Nginx proxy and configuration, because we deploy an Nginx container for this DNS implementation. But at the end of the day, behind the scene, is it ingress controller or is it API gateway, or actually gateway API, sorry? You decide, and you could implement one or the other, right? The technical detail implementation is something you could change. And that's the beauty of Score, because look at this. Here, I'm asking to expose. How to expose? Is it Nginx ingress controller? Is it Kong? Is it Istio ingress controller? Is it whatever, right? Is it gateway API? I don't know. And as a developer, I don't want to know. Now, the provisioner itself will be provided by your platform engineer to decide. Yes. Donc, so it's I hope I answer your question here. And you mentioned maybe API management. So I hope I answer the question here. Let's see, there is any, is it possible to use core to define specification for Windows environment? Not sure I understand the question for Windows environment. Are you talking VM, or is it about the core, the tool running on Windows? Please clarify. But all the tools I mentioned are running in Windows environment. Now, if it's to deploy a workload in Windows, please clarify what you mean here. So let's continue. That was part of the demo, right? What I want now to show you is, and I'm taking more time here, but I think that's better to understand and to answer the question. So now what we will do for the workshop is we will onboard an application from Backstage. With that, you could see how you could play with Backstage. Then we will create an ephemeral environment. We will see what Backstage with scaffold and onboard a new application. We will do a feature request with an ephemeral environment. We will promote to a dev, staging, and production environment. We will add a dependency, right, in cluster or via Terraform. And we will see how to centralize security and governance. In all of that, we will play the developer persona and the platform engineering persona. So I hope with that you have a good understanding on a concrete implementation, how to do that with our tools. Bear with me and follow along, because you may not be able to do the step-by-step stuff because I will go fast, right? But it's recorded, you have access. We will give you some access during 1 week maybe on the environment. You could play with that. And the goal is, if you want more information, you could contact us, right? So I will go fast. I apologize. If you could follow along, play and do your stuff, you have access. But I won't be like slow in the step-by-step. I will go through all of that. Let's do it. Again, you received 2 emails this morning. I apologize. The first one is not working. The second one, this one, workshop 2024-09-05, is the one you should claim your account now if you want to have access and see the Humanitec portal, Humanitec UI. It's not mandatory. If you don't want to get access, if you don't want to play during what I'm doing, just follow this webinar with me, bear with me, and you will understand everything. You could play both platform engineer and developer persona because you are administrator in this organization. To start, you just have to follow this link here, which is the first entry point for a developer perspective, right? So here, what I want to show you is a Backstage instance already deployed, right? And here, let me go to the chat and send the link. That's where you should go, right? So that's this QR code or link I just shared in the Slack, in the chat. And you will see this Backstage instance, right? Let me switch to this. I don't know if you're familiar with Backstage, but Backstage is a portal where you could have 3 main functionalities, features. You could centralize for your developers the technical documentation. You could, as a second feature, provide scaffolding and onboarding template. If I want to onboard as a developer for a project with, let's say, a Node.js application or a Java application, and I need a Postgres or Mongo, etc., you could provide a ready-to-use scaffolding template, right? Here, maybe you will create a GitHub repository, you will provide the source code, the Docker file, now the score file, and you will wire up the CI/CD in order to deploy in the platform. The goal is to accelerate the onboarding of your developer. That's the second feature of Backstage. That's what we have here and what we will play with. The third feature of Backstage is now it's deployed. I'm interacting with different API, maybe. I want to centralize what we call the single pane of glass of the developer portal. And you will interact with different API, right? Tools, GitHub, Humanitec now, maybe your observability tool. So you could centralize and having the plugin in Backstage, integrating the plugin and interacting with the different API. Here, we will play with that. So here, what you could do in the template is you could choose a template. You could give a name, right? So let's say it's myself, and I could fill out as many fields as it's exposed by my platform team here. I review, I create, and here I will publish what was in this scaffolding template. And the goal is to create a GitHub repository for a new project with the name I just gave, and create what we call a Humanitec project, Humanitec application, right? And look at this. I have now a repository. It's now in Backstage, right? Here, I could open the repository. Look at this. The scaffolding helped me to onboard me as a developer, as a new project, as a new application, right? In the organization, this name I just gave, with all the templating. I have my Docker file. You should recognize this guy because I just showed it earlier. The index.js talking to a MySQL database. And I have all the dev container, for example, if I want to open in VS Code, code space, like I was using for validation of the score spec here, for example, and all the tools already installed, right? And other tool, for example, Score Compose, Score Kubernetes, humctl, kind, etc. So with that, I have a template and the CI/CD part, right? In this case, GitHub action. So I have the deploy, the pull request, CI/CD. I will illustrate soon. A deploy, close PR, etc., right? So that's the scaffolding mechanism, right? In Backstage, if I go back here, I go to open in catalog. So now I go back in the home page, and I'm seeing someone, two people actually. Thank you. You could play with that. You could create the template like I did, and two people are doing that. But if I open back this guy, look at this. I have now the service catalog. What I have done, there is a deployment perspective made by Humanitec, right? Is it Backstage deploying directly to Humanitec? The answer is no, right? Backstage just created the GitHub repository I showed you. And I will show you how it was deployed in Humanitec. But then back, we have this plugin able to pull from the API of the orchestrator the information about this application, this project. Look at this. One environment was provisioned for me. Thank you, right? And it succeeded apparently. So, and I have a workload and I have a warning. So maybe I could deep dive. I have a DNS and I should have also a MySQL. Yes, I have a MySQL and now it's success, right? So I have some information here. And maybe that's a single pane of glass as my developer portal, right? But what you could do as well is seeing that in Humanitec, right? So I have my application and I could have here opening the same exact mechanism here. And I have information about the latest deployment, successful. Here it's still unhealthy, so maybe the rollout, the deployment is happening. I have a DNS generated for me. I didn't know the value. I may be on a cluster that was implicitly assigned to me, right? I have a list and history of deployment, right? We mentioned shared secrets and values. Here you could add secrets, right? That's how you will bind to your external secret store we mentioned earlier. I have a workload, and on my workload, I have direct dependencies. I ask for a DNS and database. You remember in score file? Here, the workload page is very much the score spec, right? All of the direct, explicit information, where I expose the information here and the dependencies. So I have a MySQL, and look at that. I have a MySQL. I don't know where it is, right? But someone just allocated me a host, a name, a password, a port, right? And with that, I could use that in my, if I go back to the environment variable, sorry about that, on the workload, I have my container, and here, for the container, I could now inject my environment variable, right? But I don't have the value. They will be generated at deployment, right? And that's how now I could see, yeah, my logs of my container. It was starting with a failure, and once the database is ready, now my application is up and running, right? So if I go back here, I should see now everything in green, healthy, right? So that's how, as a developer portal, I'm not touching directly Kubernetes or any provisioning of the MySQL database. Someone is dealing that with me, for me, actually, right? And what I want to show you as well, look at this. I also have a visual representation of my deployment, because the orchestrator, like mentioned earlier, will resolve a graph of resources. There is a DNS, and to your question earlier, how to implement DNS. In my case, look at this. In the workload, right, I ask for a DNS and a MySQL. And the DNS, look at this, has implicit dependencies, right? And the dependencies are the root, but look at this, ingress as well. So in this case, in Humanitec, in my own organization, I'm using ingress because I have an Nginx ingress controller. But guess what? You could replace this guy by having the HTTP root for gateway API, for example, right? So it depends how the technical implementation will be done, but the platform engineering is dealing with that. I don't know as a developer. I never mentioned ingress, right? With that, I could very be abstracted. Is there any breaking change with the ingress versioning in Kubernetes manifest? Are we switching to gateway API? I don't know. It's too much detail for me. I need to focus on my code, right? And I have a contract. I just need to expose my workload, right? So very, very interesting features here. I hope you feel that the developer could have this self-service mechanism with a score for provisioning, but as well self-service to have debugging tool, logging tool, and status tool here. Combination of Backstage and the Humanitec portal, you decide. You could use both or one or the other because you could have some overlap, but Backstage could add more highly customization perspective as well, right? So you pick and choose here. So that's the first part of Backstage scaffolding. And again, what I want to clarify is, you remember, there is no magical, it's not Backstage deploying to the orchestrator. What is it? You remember the first project repository created? We got one commit from Backstage. And guess what? In the by default CI/CD pipeline here in GitHub, we have deploy. And here, on any push on main, please do something. And that's the one doing the deployment in Humanitec, right? We are building the container, right? Pushing in a registry, in this case, Google artifact registry. But at the end of the day, look at this. We ping the Humanitec API orchestrator. Please deploy this core file in development for this application, which is a project, right? And inject the new image just built and maybe put a message. So you see here, that's actually how the scaffolding was happening. Backstage is creating the GitHub repo with all the template. And there is at the first commit, right? There is a trigger to deploy that in Humanitec via this GitHub action, right? I hope this makes sense. With that, you could see where you fit in your own tools. You replace Jenkins, you replace GitLab pipeline. That's the same principle, right? Backstage will pop up that in your source control, and your CI/CD will trigger and deploy here with this Humanitec CLI, right? For the score file. I hope that makes sense. And the question earlier was the tools running on Windows VM. So the tools, Score Compose, etc., yes, are running on Windows, and Windows is supported. Cool. No more question, I think. The link was shared. So yeah, let's move on. What I want to show you now is, if I go now in my project, right? I'm in CodeSpace. I'm locally, right? Here, what I want to show you is, let's say I want to do a feature request, right? And the goal is to change the message in the hello Humanitec, right? I want to change the message because if I go here, right, development, by default, if I open this guy here, the DNS generated, look at this, it's hello world, right? So what I want to show here is, and actually I will go, not in my code space because that's my other project provision earlier, but let's do this live. I just scaffold 10 minutes ago this new project. So let's do in the score file, in this very guy here, edit, and I will add this message, right? So message and hello Humanitec, right? And here, commit change, and I will do a branch because best practice, new message, right? And I will do a branch because I want to test that in an ephemeral environment, a temporary environment. I don't want to publish that in main, in development, right? I don't want to impact the other people in my team, and I want to test. I maybe tested that locally. Now I need to test that in a real environment. So please, via your support platform engineer with your own IDP, build with Humanitec, could you help me do ephemeral environment? Guess what? If you may have seen here in the scaffold template, you remember the first init, deploy, and there is another one, pull request. On pull request, open, reopen, or synchronize, please do something. Here, what we will do, we will build the container, we will push that in a registry, and look at that. We are creating a temporary environment. We are creating an environment, right, name, with the name of the peer, pull request, or merge request in GitLab, and from an environment. So we are duplicating an environment, let's say development, right? Because maybe my main branch will deploy in development. But for pull request, I will create a temporary environment based on development. So here we are cloning, duplicating the environment to have maybe multiple workloads, not just my workload currently, many other workloads that people could deploy in. And now after that, look at that. I want to actually deploy my current workload. I just change, right? So I will be able to have a very ephemeral environment here, right? And after that, we grab some information, error details, if there is, and we display that in the pull request, right? And look at this, it's already done. While I was talking, all of this was done. So it's not magical, it's just happened. Look at this. We did the create environment I showed you here. We then build the container. We push the container, and we actually deploy score file in Humanitec. And then we grab the information, and look at this. Here, the developer is not leaving their GitHub or source control. I have an information about the namespace generated. And if I open it, guess what? Hello, Humanitec, right? So I was able to fast having a duplicating environment, ephemeral, testing my stuff, validating it, and having some diff. Yeah, I changed the message. Yes, that's true. I changed the image. Yeah, someone builds a new image for me. And yeah, I have some metadata change. I have the resource graph here with more detail. I could have the dependencies list here. So I could have some information. But I could go back to Humanitec as well if I want, right? And here, guess what? I have the project I just created via Backstage, development environment. And here, that's the PR1 I just created. And it was like literally 3 minutes ago, right? And that's the same workload, right? But if I open the workload, that's where I will see that I just added the message, hello Humanitec, right? Same dependencies. It's a MySQL database, temporary, a new one. It's not the one I provided earlier. That's a new one, right? And what I could do now is, okay, well tested, it's okay. let's move on and let's merge in main, right? So let's merge, right? Here, what is interesting here is we will trigger another GitHub action, right? And here we will destroy the environment because it's an ephemeral environment. And there is some compute. I deployed the CPU, the memory for the workload. I may have deployed external dependencies in cluster or external. So please, could you delete everything to clean up and save cost, right? The principle of ephemeral environment to gain in confidence and in quality test, as well as reducing cost, right? So here, I could tear down and destroy the entire environment that was provisioned temporarily for me. So at the close PR, what we just do is one single line interacting with the API. Please delete this environment, right? So if I go back here, yes, environment is deleted. So if I go back here, I don't have any more PR1. I just have development. So that's a powerful feature here to do ephemeral environment. And a good example is with a feature request, merge request, pull request that you could do. I hope that makes sense. I hope I'm not going too fast, but because there is a lot of content, I want to move on the concept. It will be recorded, so you could play back and watch back this content in more details. But yeah, I hope it makes sense because that's very powerful what I'm showing you here. A lot of people are not able to do that without us. That's why I'm showing you what you could accomplish with us. Where are the values for DB details getting stored? And that's a good question. There is different answer for that, right? But if I look at this here, you remember on the workload, I got a database here. And here, secrets are not showing here. They are hidden by the orchestrator, right? I will just see the clear text information. Host name port. I don't see the password, for example, right? Nor the username, for example. They are secrets, right? The secrets are not displayed here. And where they will be stored in a config map. They will be generated, and I will go there with a resource definition, and they will be stored after that as Kubernetes secret directly in your cluster, right? So that's how it's working here. There is a way to bring your own secret in different cases. Here, it's more about generating random secret, for example, for ephemeral environments. That's very powerful to do that. I hope it's clear enough on my answer. Happy to provide more information. Would it be possible for the new DB in ephemeral environment spin up from a data backup from the development environment? That's a good question. By default, no. But what you could do is answering the request, hey, I want a MySQL. Oh, you want a MySQL for ephemeral environment, right? Okay, grab maybe a backup from the previous environment. You will be able, for example, to do that with Terraform, right? Maybe. I'm not an expert on that, but that's kind of capabilities you could do. So you could decide here what you want to do with a different, what we call driver type, which is what is the actual technical detail implementation of I want a MySQL. Is it in cluster? Is it existing out there? Or is it Terraform provisioning in AWS, GCP, Azure? And here you have more customization perspective you could do. So if you are able to do that in Terraform, for example, that could be a good example, right? Top of mind, that will be my answer. Yeah, no more question for now. So far, so good. Please let me know if you have any other question. Here we have some people doing some tests. 3 people. I don't know if you're just following me, and that's okay. If you're blocked to just do and use Backstage to provision a Git repo and having the kickoff in Humanitec, that's easy to do. So just do it maybe and ask if you're blocked. I'm curious to see if there is any limitation. But yeah, 3 people are doing it, which is good. But but for the rest, thank you for following along. Cool. So what we have seen here, we saw, if I go back to my list, we saw the onboarding from Backstage, right? Creating scaffolding, onboarding a developer project, which is good, right? We just saw how to do ephemeral environment, to create a new environment and to destroy the environment and associated resources, right? I will go in more detail about the resources because for now it's an abstraction. We were more on the developer persona here. What I want to show you now is promoting to another environment. There is no magic and no more than what I already said. But what I want to clarify is, okay, now, guess what? Maybe today you have a Git flow. Maybe like me, you are doing feature request, pull request, branch to deploy in an ephemeral environment. If you have this, that's already good. Maybe you are deploying in a dedicated feature request branch environment. And maybe when you will merge in main, you will deploy in the first graduating environment, development, let's say, right? That's what I'm doing. If I merge to main, guess what? I have a GitHub action, right? So I got the first init. Backstage trigger that actually by creating the repo and doing the first commit. I did a pull request and having the associated GitHub action. I got the deletion of the environment when I deleted the PR. And I have another one, which is as soon as I merge in main, I got another GitHub action. And this guy build again the container, push officially in the registry, and deploy the score file in the development environment here, right? So for the graduation, that's still something you could do by using score deploy, right? But let's say you want to promote an entire environment. It's doable via humctl and API, but I'm showing you very quickly how to do that via the UI, right? Because here I now have my my application with a new version, and the new version has, guess what? The message hello Humanitec, because I just merged in main, right? So all good here. What I want to do, and all of that could be done via CLI or API, because you may have already your workflow, manual approval or auto approval in your CD pipeline, right? GitLab pipeline, GitHub Action, Azure DevOps, Jenkins. Maybe you have already all of this workflow for approval and promoting environment to environment, right? So what you will do is interact with our API to do that, right? And one way to do that is I want to promote all what was deployed in development, because maybe we are multiple people, multiple developer, multiple microservices. We want now to promote dev to staging. I don't know, it's maybe a strategy you have, right? If it's the case, by API, you could do what I will do, but I want to show you in the UI. Here, I'm creating an environment, but maybe it's already existing, right? And I want to create staging, or I want to promote to an existing staging. I create an environment and I review and deploy, and I deploy. That's it, right? So if I go back here, I will see now that I have development, staging, and I could do the same for production. And here it was a creation of an environment because it didn't exist. But if it exists, I could just promote and promote from one environment to another, right? So I hope it makes sense. Because that's capabilities you could integrate with your CI/CD pipeline existing in order to deploy a specific workload, humctl score deploy, or promote an environment with humctl deploy environment, like I just said and illustrated, right? How can we manage artifact promotion between environment based on the manual testing gate? Yeah, so when you mention artifact, is it like one workload, score file, for example, with a container, or multiple? So here there is multiple strategy, right? And you pick and choose. You could do one or the other, like I mentioned. There is two way, humctl score deploy, or humctl on deploy. So I want to deploy the entire environment to another one, or I just want to deploy this specific score file and a new container version in this targeting environment, right? You have two options. And here we know that people have different strategy, right? Are you promoting doing continuous delivery versus continuous deployment, where the manual step are? Manual step and manual approval could be in your own Jenkins, own Azure DevOps, own GitHub action, right? And you could just ping the API accordingly in the orchestrator. Manual could be done here. What we have also, just so you know, here we have what we call pipeline, Humanitec pipeline. It's complementary to your pipeline in your own CI/CD tool, right? If you don't have advanced workflow in CI/CD tool, you could maybe use what I will show you. But supposingly, you have already CI/CD in place with manual approval, maybe with some promotion between environment, etc., etc. So maybe you want to keep that. Complementary to that is what I'm going to show you. Actually, on a specific deployment, and actually, let me go back. On a specific deployment, we have this pipeline, Humanitec pipeline. And that's very convenient. Sorry for the DNS. Tick. If I click on the pipeline, as soon as I do humctl score deploy or humctl env deploy, right, I will have this guy here, deploy environment within the orchestrator. And look at this. You have all the logs of what we do when we resolve the graph, right? When we provision the DNS, the root, the TLS certificate, the ingress, base environment, and the workload, right? And supposingly I should have a MySQL. Yeah, I have a MySQL here, right? If I have error, they will pop up here as well, right? So that's the pipeline. Why I'm showing you that is because here it's triggered by the API, humctl score deploy, right? And look at this. We provide you a default pipeline doing that, and there is a definition. And in the definition, we have our own language or like definition of what it's a Humanitec pipeline, very inspired by GitHub Action YAML file, GitLab pipeline YAML file, Jenkins YAML file, Azure DevOps YAML file. At the end of the day, you have jobs, you give a name, you have steps. And guess what? The step is deploying what by default. Why I'm showing you that is because actually we have here, if I go back to this example here, we have examples to provide notification to Slack, for example, if you don't want to do that in your own CI/CD pipeline, right? So we provide the notify snippet in order to use a step, which is notify HTTP. You notify Slack, you notify your tools, a callback, etc., etc. So that's a snippet. And now to better answer your question about manual approval, promote between environment after approval, right? Again, if you don't want to do that in your own existing CI/CD tool, you could do here a step, wait for approval, right? And you will have someone approving to go now from one environment, for example, dev to production. That's how you could, and you will be able to accomplish that, right? Long answer, but I hope it makes sense to see the capabilities here. What if we have multiple workload in one repository? That's a good question. Actually, let me grab, I don't know if you're familiar with Google Cloud sample app that you could deploy not on just on Google Cloud, on AWS, on Azure as well. But that's this famous online boutique, microservices, hipster shop, very popular, 11 microservices, right? So we have a sample, and I could provide the link here. I think I have a blog article at the end of this session I want to share with you all. And before that, I didn't share the link to everyone, but the Backstage instance is here. But to answer your question, here there is 11 microservices. And here, again, I have seen multiple strategy for companies doing this, how they deploy that. Is it one monolith CD pipeline deploying all in once? Maybe. But I have seen others doing one deployment per microservice independently, right? There is pros and cons to do that. And us, we are not opinionated. We provide you the ability to do whatever you want. So if you want to do the humctl score deploy I showed you for just one score file, that's what I showed you in the node service, right? If you want me to show you back, I could show you, but that's one microservices, right? So now to your question, if I want to deploy everyone at once in monorepo, multi-repo, whatever, but at the end of the day, I want to deploy all in once. Here, what you could do, in addition to the score file, right? So for example, I have for card service, I have a score file, right? Here, with a Redis or whatever dependency. I also have front end. And look at this. Front end has the dependencies here, resource, on other services. There is a dependency on ad service, card service, checkout service, currency service, payment service, etc., etc. Maybe they are not deployed at the same time, but in the namespace at the end of the day, front end should be able to talk to everyone, right? To be functional, right? A front end need a card service, a product catalog service, etc., etc. So here, as a developer, I'm designing my contract. I need all of that, right? How it's deployed, is it in the same time? I don't know, right? It could be independent because maybe you have deployed some robustness and resilience capabilities where this front end is not crashing if the services are not yet available. But at the end of the day, you need all of that, right? Why I'm telling you that is there is one score file for each because one developer could provide the specification, the contract for each. But what you could do is having Humanitec is providing a config, which is called score deploy config. And here, instead of doing humctl score deploy add, right? humctl score deploy card, etc., you could say, no, humctl score deploy this guy here, everyone, 11 of them at the same time, right? So I hope that's a good illustration for you. Again, multiple avenue and option here, but yeah, that's possible. And I shared the link of the repo. I have a blog article going through step by step this online boutique illustration with Humanitec. Cool, very good question. I love the question, please. And thanks for the feedback about promotion and monorepo and stuff. How do you suggest? So another question. For ephemeral environment, data backup and stuff, I provided a little bit of information. I hope it was helping. Otherwise, let me know. Now, how do you suggest, and from the same person, how do you suggest ending DB migration and similar mutation in my services when it comes to the environment, deploying to existing environment, promoting a new one, and something else? Again, like you could, I hope you have already the feeling what Humanitec is doing and what we don't do, right? And here there is opinionated way to do DB migration or database initialization, schema migration, data migration as well. What I have seen working well in cloud native world is having a combination with the developer, having a relationship with the schema and the code, right? So maybe having some ORM, like object relational modeling framework, helping with, hey, I need to migrate up my schema to version 2, or even in going down in the migration. There is some capabilities if you know .NET Entity Framework, other like Spring Framework with maybe Java, or I don't remember exactly, Hibernate and stuff like this, where you could have a relationship between your code, the schema, and the databases. In a cloud-native world, I have seen that working well, but I know that sometimes you have a DBA, you have an external team for your database. So how you pass a backup, how you restore a backup, a backpack, how you migrate the schema of the database, etc., etc. So here, I don't have a straight answer and generic answer to provide, but yeah, there is some consideration and some entry point you should have. When you create an environment or when you duplicate an environment, you may be able to grab data information. Now, who is running the schema migration, data migration? Question mark, I don't have an answer, but it's on a case-by-case basis. So more to discuss in detail, but yeah, we don't have like a solution on a generic aspect here. It's different option are in place. Good, wonderful. Please keep the question coming. Here, I just want to check my content. I did the promotion. Now, what I want to show you is more about the how I add a database dependency, right? We have already seen that because by default, the node service has a MySQL database, right? So it was already the case, but what I want to show you is in more detail how, as platform engineer, I could actually answer this request here, right? I want a MySQL, right? So here, that's the notion of recipes, or what we call in Humanitec, resource definition. So here, I'm not anymore a developer, right? I will have my platform engineer hat, and I will have access to more stuff. By the way, I'm logging in as administrator. That's why I'm seeing everything, the application of everyone, right? But as a developer, I will have role-based access control in place. If I'm platform engineer, I may be administrator, but let's say I'm Mathieu Benoit, right? I will just have maybe access to this application here, right? And not from the entire organization. And I won't have access to more technical detail from the resource definition, right? So here, as an administrator, I have access to this, right? So just to illustrate the airbag access and the user access, here, that's the resource definition. Yeah, the link tick, wonderful. This guy and the Backstage demo was not shared properly. Apologize for that. Sharing the link. No, I'm not able to do that. Okay. So for the Backstage, it's this guy here. Thank you for asking. So the Backstage is here. And again, you could, if you just join or just want to play now, you could create a template. It's very easy. You choose, you provide a name, you click review, and boom, 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 next. And you are up and running. To continue on the resource definition, here, that's all the intelligence, the magical aspect of the IDP, your own IDP, internal developer platform, built with Humanitec, with the orchestrator of Humanitec, right? Again, the request is coming in for a deployment for a score file in the context of a project and environment, right? So here, what you will say is, yeah, I want, for example, for MySQL, I want to define a resource type MySQL. I want for everyone matching criteria, or maybe just for development, and maybe for this specific project, what we call Humanitec application, and maybe a combination could be also, yeah, but also for staging, etc., etc. So you could have a combination of rules and criteria to select this, this specific resource definition, right? I will define here a driver template. So what does that mean? For any resource definition, you have a type, MySQL, Redis, Mongo, Kubernetes cluster, namespace, ingress, name it, everything, right? You have a type. Now the contract is how, as platform engineer, I resolve this request of, hey, I need a MySQL. Here, I have an example of, I want to provision a MySQL in cluster to save some cost, for example, in development, in ephemeral environment. I made the choice as a company in my IDP that someone by default will provision a MySQL database in cluster, not in AWS, not in GCP, not in Azure. So here I will be able to provide manifest, Kubernetes manifest, my stateful set, persistent volume if I need, etc., etc. So here I will provide the Kubernetes manifest because we are using what we call the driver type template, right? So there is three main driver type for any resource type, MySQL, Redis, Mongo, etc. You have three main ways to implement each of them. Template, manifest, I just showed. You have also what we call echo. Echo is an existing database outside, and I have already the connection string. So here is a connection string. I don't do anything. I echo the value. And the third one is Terraform, right? So as soon as I add a new resource definition, again, I'm doing ClickOps here, just to show you visually what does that mean. But you could do that via the REST API, humctl CLI, as well as Terraform. We have a Terraform provider for Humanitec in order to provision stuff I'm showing you visually, right? And here, guess what? When I'm selecting MySQL, I have multiple drivers, but again, there is three main drivers: template, echo, and Terraform, right? So that's how you decide, hey, for MySQL, here is my concrete implementation. For this specific context, and you remember the context, for one specific after that, I could say, for this specific matching criteria. So this type, this concrete implementation for this context. And that's it. That's how the magic is happening. And what you could do here, look at this. If I filter, I have another scenario, which is Redis. Here, I have the three examples I mentioned. Resource type, Redis. So if someone is asking for Redis, how I select Terraform versus Echo versus template? Template, matching criteria, default, right? And maybe from development, ephemeral environment, it's working. But now maybe what I want to do is, let's say, dynamic provisioning in GCP or AWS or Azure, right? So here what I could have is having this Redis dynamic. And here the configuration, so it's Terraform. I could provide my own Terraform module in order to pass some variables from the context, the credential in order to provision. And here it will provision actually memory store in GCP in my case, right? It could be Azure, Redis, AWS, etc., right? But here at the end of the day, you have a way to say for Redis, in this resource definition, use a Terraform template. I will bring my own module and you will provision that for me, right? And it will be for a specific context. For example, I could say for starting from staging, let's do that, right? Boom. But also, maybe I could bring echo. So again, I have an existing database already in production. I don't want to provision a new one. I don't want to lose my data, for example, or I want to reuse an existing database. What I could do is say, yeah, for production, now it's very specific for an application. I have this value. And the value will be very hard-coded. I have the host, the port, and maybe password and username, right? Three main concrete implementation for each type. And there is a lot of types, right? Again, the list of types in resource definition are here. Look at this. There is a lot of resource type, right? I hope this makes sense. No open questions for now. But yeah, that's most of the concept here. And again, after that, via score or here, I could say, hey, I want now for my workload, right? I ask for a database here, but I could add in score, and I will show you in score just to make sure. And I could add in the UI as well, right? We don't recommend this approach, but here you see in the resource definition, it was maybe, I don't know, 50, 60 resource types. Here I just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And here it's reducing the cognitive load. Why? Because actually my IDP in the resource definition, my platform engineer are just supporting this type. You remember in the VS Code extension, the list of what I could use? That's here. That's a subset of what we support in my organization, right? With that, we reduce the cognitive load, and we are using what we call the well-supported golden path, right? And yes, I want Redis. So I have my Redis, right? And that's it. I now, in addition to MySQL, I'm adding my Redis. And I don't know again, is it Terraform, template, echo? I don't know, right? If I hit deploy, right? Now I'm adding Redis, boom, I will deploy, and the orchestrator will pick up the proper resource definition based on the matching criteria. Oh, that's for this application, this project, in this environment, dev, staging, or prod. Okay, let's pick up this one and do whatever you want it to do, right? And run the Terraform script if needed, for example. So that's this notion of resource definition and how the resource graph is resolved, right? I hope this makes sense. 20 minutes-ish, less than 20 minutes is remaining. So what I want to show you here is the next piece. Now we have seen some dependencies: Redis, MySQL, direct and explicit ask for dependencies for a workload, right? Now, we mentioned earlier, and I got a question about security, how I shift down to the platform, how I will be able to inject security stuff in my MySQL, in cluster, or in Terraform, etc., etc. So I want to show you yet other definition in the resource definition, how you could inject labels and annotation and also security context and stuff like this, right? I just had 2 questions, so maybe let me pause a little bit and answer the question. I saw a TLS certificate in resource types list related. Does each workload enable SSL by default? Where is SSL termination, ingress controller, workload container? That's a really good question. So you remember, I appreciate the question. Good catch. So if I go back here, you remember this very beautiful graph, right? The DNS I was asking in score, right here, was actually, and I didn't mention very explicitly, was provisioning the ingress, but was also provisioning a TLS certificate, right? And look at this. Here, by default, and that's not the developer here in this case. You remember in my score file, here, back to the score file, I just mentioned DNS and root. I didn't mention TLS because actually I shouldn't care as a developer, right? It's too much technical detail implementation because like you mentioned, is it at the edge on the load balancer on my cloud provider? Wow, it's too much cognitive load and expertise that I don't have. Is it in cluster as a secret? I don't know. It's too complicated, right? How I wire up that in ingress, yada, yada, right? So the goal is to have this implicit, not explicit. So indirect resource, TLS cert, from the DNS, right? And that's how you will be able to do that. So here, if I go, and if you look at this resource definition, right? I don't have a DNS here, but look at this. By default, Humanitec is providing some default resources. And one of them is DNS, right? And this guy here, I don't have the, because it's by default the configuration, it's actually co-provisioning a TLS certificate. So for example, let's say you bring your own DNS, because here we are generating our own DNS. When you will bring your own tools, the DNS is part of that. So guess what? You will do DNS, right? Let's say you will use Cloudflare, a wildcard DNS, static, AWS Route 53, or you could do Terraform, provisioning something in Azure, in Google Cloud, or whatever, right? Or you could say, yeah, it's Echo, because actually I know my DNS.com, right? And that will be this guy. But look at that. I will be able to say, as platform engineer, I want to co-provision a TLS certificate because I need that, right? So that's how, in more details, you could do that. And look at this. You could select another type. And here you will be able to say, yeah, anyone asking for a DNS, I will do something else. In this case, I'm just taking one example like this. I will provision a TLS certificate. And that's how it's added in the resource graph implicitly, right? And I could add the DNS, and now it would be pickup on this. And now I have my DNS, let's say, but I didn't provide the information for TLS certificate. The default TLS certificate we have here, I don't have the configuration to show you because it's default, but at the end of the day, guess what? It's yet another resource definition. So a DNS will provision a TLS cert. So what I will do is, okay, now I need to define the actual TLS cert, right? And for TLS cert, I select this guy. And what I could do is, if I want, using the template, I could say here, please do the secret in Kubernetes, for example. If I have the key, the certificate here, the PEM file, and the cert file that I want to insert in Kubernetes. So here my answer, maybe it's not clear yet, but what I mean by that is, what do you do today? Are you terminating the TLS at the load balancer level? You don't need to do that, what I'm showing you here. So you will skip the TLS termination in the cluster because the TLS termination is at the load balancer level. But if you are passing through and terminating in the cluster, depending on your ingress controller, et cetera, you could provide the TLS cert in the cluster, right? And by default, that's what we do, actually. When I go back to the graph, that's what we do. So there is a way to not provisioning the resources or provisioning in a certain way, right? I hope it was clear enough. I know I was maybe all around the places explaining this workflow here of definition, but that's very important. So I hope it was clear. Otherwise, ask me to clarify. But that's a really good point. And again, Humanitec, that's to show you as well that we don't have an opinionated way to tell you how to do TLS termination. You bring your own setup, and we will properly set up the resource definition. Should we crash a Kubernetes manifest? No. Should we skip because it's done earlier? Yeah, we could do that as well, right? So it's plug and play and configure your own stuff with us, right? Again, I hope, Zishan, it's making sense. Okay, cool. Thank you. You understood. But yeah, there is possibilities and options here. Back to the Windows environment question. In my case, as platform engineer, I need to provide a template consisting of a VM running Windows, legacy application, SQL Server. A very particular group of developers can open the Backstage and create an application using such a template. Could it be possible? Yes. I mean, without Humanitec, with Backstage, you could do that, right? You could, with Backstage, if you don't know Backstage, you will need to build everything. You have an empty shell, and you need to plug the plugin with your cloud provider, with GitHub, with Terraform, with maybe Humanitec, and you will be able to say, hey, here is my template, here is what it will do, yada, yada, and here is my snippet to onboard. That's what you need to do and build the container, republishing your Backstage instance, exposing that to your developer, and they will be able to select that without Humanitec, right? That's the Backstage instance I showed you. Now, if I want to be more specific with Humanitec, today, we just support as a runtime, so where the actual workload will be running, we just support Kubernetes. We don't support serverless nor VM. We don't support VM today. That's something we are working on the roadmap. I don't have any time frame here, but that's something we are looking at, more scenario like you mentioned. But the runtime specifically for the workload, I just want to clarify, it's a container running on Kubernetes, right? If you have, I don't know, WASM, WebAssembly on Kubernetes, that's still a container on Kubernetes. If you have serverless on Kubernetes, that's still a container running on Kubernetes. So everything on top of Kubernetes will work. Outside Kubernetes, it's not yet supported. So that will be my part of my answer. Now back to the other part of the answer. You have seen the driver type Terraform. You may want and be able to deploy anything in your Terraform, right? So if you deploy a container or a workload, and hey, I need an instance, a SQL Server, a VPC, a VNet, a subnet, a PSC binding or VNet peering, etc., etc. That's something you could do with a Terraform driver, right? Having more dependencies around one workload. But again, for the containerized workload deployment, it's on Kubernetes to be able after that here, to be able to grab the logs, for example, of the container, etc., right? We are not able to do that on VM or serverless, for example. That's a concrete why illustration. I hope I answer the question here. Is it possible to also drive stuff like sidecars and daemon set in Kubernetes cluster with this? Yes, you could. So for example, here, if I go there, create draft delta, I will create a new workload. Look at this. I have, by default, a workload, the score workload you saw, right? And here I'm on the UI. It's possible to select that via a score file. There is a default profile, which is a deployment in Kubernetes, sorry. Here, you see, I could also say, hey, I want a job or a cron job, not a deployment, right? And you could bring your own custom workload profile. And for example, oh, I need a stateful set. From score, I need to deploy in a stateful set, or I need to deploy to a daemon set. That's where you will be able to configure the custom workload profile, and the developer will be able to say, no, I don't want the default module. I want my company daemon set compliant workload profile. So yes, there is capabilities here. Good question. I appreciate it. So because 7 minutes is remaining, let me illustrate the security first by design approach, shifting down to the platform. Look at this. I will give you an example. And for sidecar, one of the ways sometimes it's injecting, if you know Dapper, Istio, and others, there is a mechanism of sidecar with label and annotation. So maybe that could be a good illustration here. But look at this. I'm providing, because when we resolve a request for a deployment, we resolve in which cluster first, right? As implicit and indirect dependencies, and then the namespace in the cluster. Here, I'm providing, as platform engineer, how to provision a namespace if it doesn't exist, or if I need to patch or update, right? Here, I'm providing the namespace. So guess what? It's a resource type Kubernetes namespace to tell to the orchestrator to pick up this guy in this matching criteria for everyone, actually, right? Do this configuration. The configuration is a template. So it's a it's a Kubernetes manifest. And look at this. I'm providing the manifest. But what if I want, let's say, a secure namespace? I will do the same, but I will be able to inject labels. Here, if you are familiar with pod security admission or PSS standard as well, Here I'm saying, please put the PSS restricted on any namespace. So here, by default, any workload won't be able to run as root or with high privilege, right? But here also I could add, I don't know, Istio, I don't remember exactly, but whatever Istio enabled, right? And that's maybe how I will be able to inject sidecar. Again, abstracting from the developer doesn't know, right? I will do that here. What I could do also is my company.io/cost center, and I will be able to add my cost center, all the label and annotation I want. Here it's on the namespace, could be on the workload. I could pass that to my Terraform script in order to put the label and tag in my cloud provider, etc., etc. What I want to show you here, it was namespace. The last bit I want to show you is workload. What if I want to inject security context? Actually enforcing the fact that any workload shouldn't run as root, right? Run as non-root, true. And using the second profile and using a user, right? Etc., etc. Not allowing the privilege escalation, not dropping all the capabilities, read only root file system. All of that is not the developer providing me. It's me sitting down as a platform engineer with my security team and Kubernetes expert. Here is a rule we want for everyone, shifting down to the platform, right? So that's a good illustration how you could inject in any resource definition more security, again, down to the platform, abstracted and standardized. So that's pretty much it for the end of the demo and workshop. I hope it was clear enough. I know it was a lot of content. I'm exhausted as well, just delivering. So I could imagine you digesting all of that. The good news is there is plenty of content out there that you could reuse. Today, we just saw the velocity for the developer with core, the stability and the standardization with the platform engineer, with SCORE, the portal, and the orchestrator. Don't forget, we have not touched that, to have the product mindset. Your IDP built on top of that is a product. You need a backlog. You need to support golden paths, and maybe not every golden path. And you need to have a PM, a PO, right, etc., etc. So that's very important for your success. We have content, we have program in place to help you with an MVP. For example, we have a program 8 weeks to help you touching with all what I showed you today and having the feeling in your own infrastructure to make sure you understand the concept. So please reach out. Again, we will share this link of the presentation, the link of the video, and maybe all the resources. Mallory, my colleague, is actually explaining how to do an MVP more on the process perspective, business perspective, how to be successful, right? Because it's a cultural approach. It's not just technical technology tool, like I illustrated today. Yes, it's important, don't make me wrong. But the most successful team out there we have seen is having an approach, a correct approach, right? So my colleague will deliver at the end of this month a workshop, actually a webinar about that. And I have some pointers for you if you want, so you will be able to grab these links. I hope it was insightful, useful. I really much appreciated the interaction with you all. Thank you for the question. I'm still here for 2 minutes. So yeah, any feedback also on the content, the pace? I know it was fast, a lot of information, but I hope you have 1, 2, 3, or 4 outcomes of this, giving you ideas. And thank you for the feedback. Yeah, we will share the slides after with an email, I'm guessing, Maria, right? For the slide and the video, or maybe in the Slack channel or by email, I don't know.
Yeah, we can share over Slack as well as over the email
okay.
With the video recording that will come in your inbox tomorrow.
Cool. Wonderful. Is there any last question I could take? Last one. Yes, Martin. Thank you everyone for the feedback. And yeah, I don't know, Maria, we will have a survey, I'm guessing as well, maybe.
Yeah, after it, please guys, I will send over the survey so you can also share how you liked it. Again, same questions that Mathieu already asked you.
Cool. Wonderful. And
there is a question how to get developers excited about the platform. If you can answer in 30
that's a good one. That's a good one. And actually, how to get them excited. And the next webinar with Marui will kind of touch on that. But at the end of the day, you need to know your customer, your developer. What are their pain points? What's working and what's not working? So at the end of the day, you are building something on top of existing tool, right? You won't start from scratch for everything. But now, how you have the contract, the interface with your developer? Are you removing all the good stuff and just bringing more difficult stuff to onboard, to understand, and to use? That's where you will fail and you won't get them very excited. Where you will get them excited is keeping what is good and transforming the pain point in solution mode and simplifying their job. Because at the end of the day, if they ship better and faster their product, they will be happier. They will have a velocity. They will earn more money inside the company, right? Because generating more income for the company. So I think it's a long answer here, but that's very important. What you asked is about getting them excited by bringing concretely what they need, right? And understanding their pain point and fixing the pain point. That's the product mindset, very important here. I hope I answered the question here, but yeah. Cool.
Well, with that, I think we can wrap it up so everyone can get either to bed right away or to continue with their day-to-day job. Thank you so much, Mathieu, for throwing this session. It was very, very insightful, and I hope a lot of people liked it. We'll send over the survey as well as the follow-up with slides for the recording to everyone tomorrow so that you can either rewatch it or share it with your colleagues or do it once again. Also, join the Platform Engineering Slack channel. If you have any other questions, feel free to ping Mathieu over there. And yeah, with that, hope everyone has a safe and great end of the day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Maria.